Okay, let's get started. So, meditation, when we think about it, what comes to mind? Relaxing. Dan, I have not proved that I'm not a robot yet. So meditation is very intimately linked with relaxation, both actually and also just kind of where our mind goes when we think about that word. Even if we have never meditated before, there's kind of this association with meditation and relaxation. Great. But why, right? Why does meditation relax us? How is it actually working? This is a really important aspect of meditation, understanding what's going on. And sometimes it's not always clear in some of the presentations of meditation. So I always really like to start with this, talking about what meditation really is and how is it actually working. So meditation is really a technique of familiarizing your mind with something. I know that's kind of vague, but you could pretty much familiarize your mind with anything that you want. Generally, people are here to familiarize it with being relaxed, right? So if we think about relaxation, meditation it doesn't equal relaxation. It's not pulling relaxation from somewhere. It is teaching you to become intimately familiar with what I will call your relaxed self. Now, you might be sitting there like, no, I'm not relaxed. Yes, you are. You have a relaxed self. It shows itself from time to time, right? There's been plenty of times where we're, nice and we're chilled out and cool, right? There's a version of us that is very calm and relaxed, level-headed, thinking clearly about our problems and things like that, not panicking, right? We've all experienced that. It's in there, right? So meditation is teaching you to become more familiar with that version of yourself. But it is very important to realize that you already have everything you need to be relaxed. Meditation doesn't equal relaxation, right? So this is an interesting kind of spin on maybe how we think about meditation or what we thought it really meant. And familiarizing our mind is kind of like a nebulous thing. But if we think about familiarizing our body, that we can connect with a little bit more because we're more familiar with doing those things. So let's think about something that you're really familiar with, your body is really familiar with, right? So let's do walking, right? Now, I'd venture to guess that at this point in your life, walking's pretty familiar to you, right? Now, you don't really got to think about it. If I were to say, hey, can you walk to that part of the room or whatever in your house, you'd be like, okay, and you just do it, right? You wouldn't really have to think about any of the mechanics of walking or use a lot of concentration to do it, right? You could say that walking comes very naturally to you at this point in your life, right? Was that always the case? I don't think so. Maybe there's like an old video of you, or, trying to walk when you were a baby, right? Kind of stumbling all over the place, falling down. It was not always this very natural thing. It required a lot of effort, concentration. So what happened in between walking being pretty difficult, right? And walking being like second nature to you? Practice. It's just familiarity. Over time, little bit each day, you're, training and walking. And what happens? Your mind, your body, everything about you becomes so intimately familiar with the mechanics of walking that it starts to just flow really naturally for you. The same is true with anything that you learn. Think about tying your shoe is another example I use, right? You can do it with no problem. Wasn't always the case, right? So there's tons of examples of physical actions that we're really familiar with. And the result is that they come naturally to us. They're easier for us. The same is true with your mind. Mental states, which is what we focus on with meditation. So relaxation, right? You can train in being so familiar with being relaxed that it starts to come to you as naturally as walking, so to speak, right? We can also go the other way, right? So it's not always benefit, right? So think about something. Anxiety is a great example. We'll talk about that today. Think about anger is another good one. Very easy to get angry. Don't have to try to get angry. Just happens. It's not because we're some inherently angry person. It is just that we've had a lot of practice getting annoyed. We have probably had more practice getting annoyed than being patient, which is kind of the opposite of anger. So our mind, when something annoying happens, is like, hey, I got it. I'll take it from here. I know what to do. I'm going to get angry. You just sit back. So our mind is just really familiar with that. Not as familiar with being patient, right? So meditation is giving us choice. It's allowing us to choose what we want our mind to be familiar with. And by proxy of that, what we want our day to be like, right? So meditation is a technique of training your mind to become familiar with the things you want to become familiar with. Whatever that is up to you, right? And that's all well and good. But when we're starting learning meditation, it is really important first to learn how to, what I'll call, pacify your mind. Your mind is very busy, a lot of thoughts bouncing around. Your mind is constantly multitasking all day long, every second of the day, even when you don't think you're multitasking, pretty much is. And when your mind is really busy, sometimes it's hard to kind of find that peacefulness, right? That peaceful you. So we're just going to clear away some of that clutter. Right? This is called using meditation to pacify your mind. Breathing meditation. You've probably heard of this before. So we're going to do that a little bit now. I guess from a technical standpoint, you could call this single-pointed concentration. That's the fancy way of saying what we're going to do, right? Single-pointed concentration means concentrating single-pointedly on something. So we're going to focus so exclusively on one thing that all other things are going to fade into the background a little bit. Kind of similar if you've ever been in the zone working out or working on a project, right? We lose track of time. We don't hear the noises that normally annoy us. It's like they're gone, right? They start to just fade a little bit. So we're going to learn how to do that intentionally using breathing meditation. And the result is that we're just going to relax a little bit. We're going to start to tap in to that peaceful self, right? And the more we do this, the more familiar that peaceful self is, right? And it'll start to show itself more often in our life, that's what we want, right? We would love to be more relaxed more often. Me too. Cool. Awesome. Okay. So let's do some breathing meditation now together. Now, if you have never done breathing meditation before, it's pretty straightforward from an instructional standpoint. You're just going to sit there. I'm going to guide us. You're just going to sit there and focus on your breath. Again, I'm going to guide us through this. And then whenever you notice that your attention drifts a little bit, maybe you're thinking about something you have to do later or something that happened at work earlier, right? Your mind's like trying to go, hey, check this out. We're going to just say, not right now to those thoughts. We'll get to them later. We're not dismissing them. We're just saying, not right now. And then we're going to bring our attention back to breathing. This is the technique of meditation. We are choosing to focus single pointedly on something, in this case, our breath, noticing when our attention drifts away from that thing, and then being able to bring our focus back to it. Those 3 steps are training in meditation. We're training our mind to focus on what you want to focus on. Right? You are back in the driver's seat of your thoughts, because right now our mind is kind of in the driver's seat. Right? Worry about this. Be upset about that. And even if we don't want to, we go there. Right? So this is our first step into using this technique to kind of take back ownership of what we want to be focusing on moment to moment. Cool? Okay. So let's do that now. And first things first, just make sure you're comfortable. Sometimes people think you have to sit like cross-legged on the floor in some position. No, it doesn't matter. You can sit in a chair. You can sit on the floor if you like doing that. If you want to be on the couch, cool. You got a comfy couch. That's fine. Maybe you had a long day. You want to lay down. Go right ahead. It doesn't matter. As long as you're relatively comfortable, you're good to go. And then you can go ahead and close your eyes. And I'm going to guide us through about a 5-minute breathing meditation. Okay? Whenever we start a meditation, first thing we always do is take a moment and check in. Ask yourself, how am I feeling right now? In this exact moment. Maybe you're happy. Maybe you're sad. Maybe you're bounding with energy. Maybe you're tired. Whatever it is, it does not matter. We're not doing anything about it. We're just noticing. This is an exercise in mindfulness, something we talked about a lot last week. Mindfulness is an active awareness of your own thoughts, moment to moment, for the purpose of being able to respond skillfully to whatever your mind is up to. So just take a moment and check in. And having done that, you can now turn your full attention to your breath. Breathing in and out, gently and naturally. You do not need to take big, deep breaths. You do not need to forcefully exhale the air. Just breathe as you normally would. In and out. And allow yourself to relax a little bit into your chair or cushion. Single-pointedly focused on each moment of each breath. Following the entire journey of each breath. Following the air as it enters your nose. And then following that same air as it exits. A moment-to-moment awareness of breathing in and out, gently, naturally. At some point, you may notice that your mind tries to take you elsewhere. Maybe starting to think about something that happened earlier today, or something that you have to do after this class ends. Whenever you notice that this has happened, no problem. We can just say not right now to those thoughts. We'll get to them later. And then purposefully guide your focus back to breathing, back to following each breath. Following the air as it enters your nose and exits. Fully present here with your breath. As you begin to relax a little bit more into your chair or cushion, keep bringing your attention back to your breath whenever you notice that it drifts. It doesn't matter how many times you need to bring your attention back. This is meditation, choosing to focus on your breath, noticing when your attention drifts, bringing it back. You are meditating right now. You are a meditator. You are training your mind to relax, to be calm, to access its natural, peaceful state. You are training your mind to focus on what you want to focus on. And right now, that's breathing in and out, gently and naturally. So just for the next couple of moments, continue to breathe in and out, and just enjoy sitting here in this moment with your breath. Okay, and when you're ready, you can open your eyes. Hello. How we doing? We awake? Sleepy? I get this question pretty much every week. If you got sleepy, that's fine. I mean, you're telling your mind, you're relaxing your mind, and your mind's very busy all day long. When you finally give your mind an opportunity to relax, sometimes it just nods off, right? So it's not a big deal. It's very common for when you're starting meditation, right? So now, maybe you found that to be challenging, right? You're like, wow, my mind is kind of jumping all over the place. And this is also a very common experience. When people start meditating, it is very common for them to kind of realize, hey, it's almost as if my mind seems busier when I meditate, right? Like my mind seems like it's jumping more. Right? And what's happening is you're just noticing how busy your mind is all day long, right? Now that we're actually taking a moment and intentionally trying to focus on one thing, we're noticing how unfamiliar that is to our mind, right? So this, just like walking, just like tying our shoe, just like anything we've ever learned, is just going to take some practice. And the more that we do this, the more familiar we become with meditating, the more familiar our mind becomes with focusing on one thing, and our mind starts to look forward to that. That's basically what we need to do, right? We need to train our mind to want to focus on one thing, because right now our mind is like, hey, I don't know what the heck you're doing, but I got a lot to think about right now, and you are not optimizing me. Right? So multitasking, great for getting worldly tasks done, not the best for relaxing. Right? So it's just going to take some time. Right? So that's a pretty traditional breathing meditation. It was maybe like 5 minutes. I don't know, something like that. But maybe that was too long for you. Maybe you're like, man, that's too much, right? Fine. What about 2 minutes? What about 1 minute? 30 seconds? It doesn't matter. This is probably the biggest hang up with starting a meditation routine is we think it requires hours of our time. It is not true. The most important thing is consistency. And everyone has a different amount of time that they are able to consistently commit to this per day, right? So whatever that is for you, that's fine, right? You don't have to compare yourself to anyone else. Cool. Nisha's sleepy. I'm a little sleepy too. Gail, this always reminds me that just 5 minutes of meditating can help me get grounded and relaxed. Thank you. Yeah. So, and I think that's a really important point. And that's why I always talk about it every week. Sorry if you're here repeatedly. But sometimes when we think about meditation and we think it requires hours, we're like, well, I don't have time for that. I'm too busy. And then we don't do it, right? So here is, showing us, hopefully, that, you know what? I can do little snippets of this and see results. Great. Awesome. Mary, your mind wandered, but you kept relaxing, doing breath. Yeah. So look, and Mary, I'm really glad you brought this up because often when we start meditation, we think, okay, the goal is for me to never get distracted, to have my mind never drift, be completely locked in 100% of the time. And I got news for you. That does not really happen that often because our mind thinks. That's what it does. Right? Our mind thinks. And so really what we're after with meditation is being able to notice when it drifts and bring it back skillfully, right? The goal is not to never have it drift. It's okay if it drifts, but can we notice it early and bring it back skillfully? That is what we're after. Great. Awesome. Cool. So if you have any other questions about meditation, breathing meditation, or anything meditation related, feel free to keep asking me via the chat. But I'm going to move on to continue our discussion from last week on anxiety. Cool? All right. So last week, we started talking about anxiety. And whenever I teach my anxiety meditation class, I generally like to split it up into 2 sessions. Right? Here's session 2. So session 1 last week was all about using mindfulness to recognize early on in the process when we're getting anxious. Right. So now if you probably have heard the word mindfulness before. It's kind of everywhere. And that's both good and not great because sometimes the definition gets mixed. But mindfulness is a technique of monitoring your mind moment to moment. And I like to equate it to a smoke alarm. Right? So if you think about a smoke alarm in your home or your apartment or whatever, when that thing goes off, what does that mean? It means, hey, something's happening. You might want to check it out. All right. It doesn't stop a fire if there is one. It is an early detection system to allow you to skillfully handle a situation. Right. That's what mindfulness is, like a mental smoke alarm. Right. And so in terms of anxiety, right, if we have good mindfulness, if we're used to and are kind of regularly checking in with ourselves, we're going to notice some of these triggers, cues, whatever you want to call it, feelings of anxiety a little earlier on than normal. And this is really the first step towards dealing with them, because anxiety, much like any other kind of negative mental state, is sort of like a forest fire. If we do not notice it, it starts to spread. And the more that it spreads, the harder it is to manage, right? So part of being able to manage anxiety with meditation is first being able to detect early on in the process when you're feeling anxious, when you're starting to feel anxious. Cool? And one of my favorite ways to start practicing this concept of mindfulness, this internal smoke alarm, is to actually set an alarm on your phone. And when that thing goes off, you're just going to check in, right? And the goal is not to like do anything about it, similar to what we talked about in the beginning of the meditation, right? That opportunity when our little mindfulness alarm goes off is our opportunity to just take inventory of what our mind is doing. And what we're trying to do here is normalize checking in with ourselves. We do not do this very often, right? Normally we go through our day and then, we're so really like, scatterbrained from all the different things that are going on. And then we're like super anxious, like, oh, I'm anxious, right? So this is a way of trying to elongate that process so we can see more clearly, hey, what's going on here? Oh, you know what? I've been a little worried about this thing at work, right? If we can catch it earlier, it's easier to manage. Cool? Okay, great. Okay, so now we've started to notice earlier on in the process that we're getting anxious. Great. Now what? What do we do about it, right? So mindfulness sets us up to be able to do something about our anxious thoughts. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So managing our anxious thoughts, or what I'll call pacifying them, right, comes down to two things, right? Two categories. Now, one of them is a word that we do not like. It's called acceptance. Now, as soon as I say that word, people are like, I don't like that. And I'm the same way. I don't like that. Yeah. We don't want to accept our anxiety because it sucks. Plain and simple. It doesn't feel good, We don't like it. And so we don't want anything to do with it, and we want to like wish it away, and I wish it would just go away, and why does this always happen to me? And those kind of things start to come up, right? But acceptance is a really important step in managing our anxiety, and it really boils down to self-talk. And we do a whole class on this, right? But acceptance isn't like, I just gotta deal with it, right? It's being okay with the fact that you're currently anxious, right? You don't have to like anxiety, but it's acknowledging I'm anxious right now, and that's okay, right? Because it's truth, right? Whether or not you want to be anxious, you're anxious, right? So a lot of this has to do with self-talk, not wishing our anxiety away, but rather changing the way that we acknowledge the fact that we're anxious, right? So what do I mean by that? Right now, whenever you get anxious, I bet you say something like, man, I'm feeling really anxious right now. Or man, my anxiety is back. I'm feeling anxious. I'm anxious, right? There's a word in there that's always kind of mixed in, right? Right? We are making a kind of connection that I equal anxious, right? And at first, might not start to identify with that, but over time, if we've been dealing with anxiety for a long time, what happens when we keep saying things like, I'm anxious, I'm anxious, I'm anxious? Our mind is making a mental connection that I equal anxiety, right? It is an inherent part of me, right? It is me, right? So what we want to do is change our talk a little bit here, right? So instead of saying, I'm anxious, or I'm feeling anxious, or whatever you might say to yourself, what about saying something like, my mind is experiencing some anxious thoughts. Oh, so this is a slightly different way of talking about anxiety. So instead of connecting right, it's my mind, right? My mind is doing this thing that my mind occasionally does, but I am okay, right? So this is a really good first step for learning acceptance, right? And maybe this is an interesting definition of acceptance, right? But if we can get to the point where we are not we're not identifying with our anxiety, right? It feels more manageable to do something about it, right? If we truly believe that at our core, we are an anxious person with no hope of being not anxious, then it's going to be hard for us to kind of unravel that, and see that the truth that we are a very peaceful person. Our mind just experiences anxious thoughts from time to time. Okay. So this is a really good thing that I would suggest you try to do in your day. So when you kind of check in with mindfulness, right? Oh, Selena. I love that. So Selena said, my mind is experiencing technical difficulties. I love that. That is brilliant. And I think adding humor here is super helpful. And I have very bad anxiety. It's why I got into meditation. It is not something that is humorous for me. It is very crippling, and painful. And so if you experience that too, I can absolutely relate to that and still do on a daily basis. But saying something like this, it lightens it just a little bit, right? My mind's experiencing technical difficulties. Look, I'm laughing just saying it, right? So this is amazing. That's a really great take on this, and maybe you have other ways that you want to change your self-talk. It doesn't really matter. The only thing that we want to do is find a way to remove I. We're not saying I'm anxious, right? My mind is experiencing technical difficulties. My mind is experiencing some anxious thoughts, right? We're disconnecting I from it, right? Yeah, it helps to lighten the mood. Yeah, that's great. That's awesome. And also what that does is lead into our next step, right? Really brilliantly. And our next step is space. Creating space. What does that mean? Creating space. I'm talking about mental space, but we can think about physical space as a means of understanding what mental space can do for us. So I always use this analogy because it's something that actually happened to me and my wife, Emily. So it's a very visceral memory for me, right? So we were vacationing in Montana. I don't know if you've ever been to Montana in the United States, but they call it Big Sky Country. And it doesn't take you long to realize why, because you can see for miles out there, right? The sky is huge. You can see, like, I don't know how many miles in the distance, but it's a long ways away. And so one time we were vacationing there, and we were sitting out in this very beautiful kind of open little wheatgrass field, and we're looking at the mountain range, and over the mountain range, way off in the distance, were extremely dark clouds. Not above us, though. It was blue skies above us. That's how far away it was. So we're seeing all these very dark clouds over the mountainscape, And we're seeing flashes of lightning, right? And what are my wife and I saying to each other? We're like, whoa, did you see that? That's so cool. I just saw a bolt of lightning. We're like, whoa, there it is again, right? There's a level of fascination, interest in this rather violent occurrence of weather, right? If you think about a lightning storm, it's pretty scary, right? There's, bolts of electricity, or maybe that's what I think it is. Shooting down from the sky, right? But here we are looking at it with a level of interest and fascination, right? Now, as we're sitting there over time, the clouds start to get a little bit closer. It's still blue skies over us, but it's starting to creep a little closer, and the grass is starting to blow back, side by side a little bit. And then eventually the clouds got so close they were like, hey, we got to get out of here. We're not safe, right? So there's a huge difference between us experiencing the storm depending on the space between us and the storm. When the storm is way off in the distance, we're looking at it with a level of clarity, interest, fascination, right? When it gets closer, what happens? That is replaced by fear, right? So that is an example of physical space, but mental space works the exact same way. When you are in the throes of anxiety, the storm is over your head, right? And when the storm is over your head, you're reacting with fear and panic, right? And it's hard to kind of look at it with clarity or interest, right? Look at these problems with interest. So what we want to do is create a little bit of space, not maybe as much as the old Montana story, but a little bit of space between us and our anxiety. And then we can kind of look at it, if we want to, with a little less panic, a little less fear, and a little more fascination and interest. And that is when we start to maybe glean some things about our anxiety at a very deep level. Right? So creating space is a huge part of dealing with negative emotions, right? We're talking about anxiety, but the same is true for anger, jealousy, all these different things, right? When a cloud is over your head, your reaction to it is very different than when it's off in the distance. Now, there's another example of this that you've probably experienced, right? You ever notice how you give great advice to your friends, but you're not always so great at giving yourself advice? I don't know. I experience that all the time, right? Why do you think that is? I gotta read Dan's comment. Pretty funny. A spinoff could be expect longer response times due to my mind is experiencing higher volumes than normal. I love that. See, this is great. This is awesome. We're putting a very lighthearted spin on something we're experiencing, and I guarantee as a result that this actually creates space, right? Humor, lightheartedness creates space, right? Cool. Awesome. Love it. So there's another example of creating space, right? And creating this example is the difference between, I guess, what I'll call self and other, right? So your best friend has a problem. They're like, this thing at work, and I don't know what to do. And then you're sitting there, and you're like, oh, I would do that. Yeah, you should do that. Yeah, definitely. Right? It's so simple, right? You're seeing things clearly, right? Why? Because the storm is over their head, not yours, right? So this is another example of how space changes our reaction to situations, right? So if something is happening to our friend, we can look at it with a level of clarity that maybe is tough when it's happening to us. So what does this mean? This means that we can use our mind, our imagination, to take advantage of space, right? So in terms of creating space, there's a couple of ways we can go about doing this. One, when we're doing meditation, breathing meditation, we're naturally creating space, right? So we're sitting down, we're choosing to focus on our breath, and all the other thoughts that are normally there, they're just kind of moving away a little bit, right? So breathing meditation is a great way of creating mental space. We don't always have time to do breathing meditation. I'm a meditation teacher and I don't spend most of my day meditating. So chances are you are also not doing that. So here is another thing to try, right? Whenever you're faced with the feeling of anxiety or anxious about something, worried about something, whatever, I want you to take a moment and really imagine, like commit to imagining that this exact same scenario is happening to your best friend, right? Every aspect of the thing that is making you anxious, imagine it's happening to them. And what advice would you give them? Right? What would you tell your best friend? Right? I guarantee you that the result of this will be a lot more reasonable and level-headed than probably what you're telling yourself, right? You know, we would never tell our friend, well, you know what, you're inherently anxious, and so there's really nothing you could do about it. This is probably just going to be for the rest of your life, right? No, or you'll be like, hey, you know, look, you know, I've gone through this stuff at work. You know, other people have. You'll get through this. Don't, like, it's way more compassionate and reasonable response, right? So why wouldn't we take that advice, right? So this is a great technique. I use it all the time personally, and I advise people to also do it. It's a little kind of mental switcheroo of situations, and then you're going to take the advice you would give to your best friend, or you're going to try, right? Cool. Awesome. Okay. So this is where I want to stop for today. And I want to do another kind of brief meditation together, just to kind of close things out, but just a recap of our kind of anxiety session, right? One, we're starting to practice mindfulness. We're starting to have our internal smoke alarm go off when we're getting anxious, and we're noticing our anxiety earlier on, right? Then we're going to work on acceptance, right? That's our next step, right? And there's been a lot of great comments and suggestions about how you can go about doing that, changing the way that you talk about yourself and your anxiety, right? So maybe something like, you know, my mind is experiencing some technical difficulties right now. Great, right? Just leave it at that. Cool. This is a great way of starting to practice acceptance. And then we want to start to find ways to create space. Maybe that's doing a breathing meditation, or maybe that's doing this little kind of mental switcheroo exercise that we talked about, imagining your best friend in this exact situation, right? And then what advice would you give them? Daphne, does journaling help in cases of chronic anxiety? Daphne, great question. So everyone is going to find benefit from different things. Journaling is a very good thing to try, right? And what journaling does is it creates space, right? You have these thoughts in your head, right? And then you're like, I am going to write them down, right? And as you're writing them down, what's happening, right? First of all, there's time in between, you know, the thing that's happening currently, and now I'm like, I'm going to write them down. So you're creating time, you're creating space in time, right? So that in and of itself is creating space, right? And also journaling can sometimes help people like kind of visualize like what is going on, right? And sometimes, and I, you know, my brother had very bad OCD, right? And he journaled a lot. And he said what it did for him is when he saw when he saw his thoughts on paper, sometimes he'd be like, that's a lot. Maybe it's not that bad or something like that, right? So the visual of that helped him a lot, right? So I'd say go for it. Experiment, right? This is all about experimenting. Great question. Cool. Okay, so let's do a little meditation to just close out our session. Cool. Let's do it. Again, just make sure you're comfy. Maybe your last seating arrangement did not meet your needs. Journaling gives one perspective. Yeah, it's an interesting way of almost giving yourself perspective of your thoughts, of your own thoughts. It's very interesting. Yeah. Do it. All right, sit comfortably. Go ahead and close your eyes, and we're just going to do another short meditation to just kind of close out today. Okay. Once again, just take a moment and check in. How are you feeling now? We're not comparing it to before. Before is done. We're just noticing how our mind is feeling now. And having checked in, you can now choose once again to focus single-pointedly on your breath. Breathing in and out gently and naturally. Following each breath, each moment, as the air enters your nose, sits, and then exits. Fully present with each moment of each breath. This moment, this moment, this moment. And maybe your mind starts to drift a little bit. Maybe it's thinking about something you have to do later or something that happened earlier today. No big deal. Whenever you notice that has happened, you can just gently say, not right now, to those thoughts. We'll get to them later. And then guide your focus back to breathing. In and out, gently and naturally. Keep bringing your attention back whenever it drifts. As you start to really plug in to each moment of your breathing, you may start to notice some interesting things about breathing that you hadn't really thought of before. Maybe you're noticing how the air feels cool temperature-wise each time you breathe in. You can feel that coolness on the tip of your nose. And that same air, it feels a bit warmer each time you breathe out. How interesting. Or maybe you're noticing your body moving as you breathe. Your shoulders rising with each in-breath and then falling with each out-breath. Every aspect of you, body, mind, breathing together, in and out. When you are single-pointedly focused on something, you begin to notice subtleties about that activity. Subtle joys. You're creating space. And in that space, you can see things clearly. You can see things that normally are hidden. Right now, you're finding subtle joys in a simple breath. How wonderful. How wonderful that you are able to find real joy, real enjoyment from something as simple and accessible as your own breath. Just for the next few moments, continue to breathe in and out and just enjoy being here in this moment with your breath. You have nothing else to do, nowhere else to be, just here, breathing. Okay, when you're ready, you can open your eyes. Hello, welcome back. Hopefully that was enjoyable, relaxing, and the discussion on anxiety was informative. If you had a good time, I'm glad to hear that. I had a great time as usual with you guys. So if you did have a good time, let's come on back. All right. We do this every week. We talk about a new topic. I don't always know what it's going to be, but it is meditation related. I can guarantee that for sure. So come back every week. We do something new. So we'd love to have you back, right? And if you haven't already subscribed to my YouTube channel and you would like to, that'd be awesome. It's super helpful for me. Lets people know that there's interest in this, and it's helpful for you too. You get notifications when I am going live with the meditation. All my old previous classes are up on my YouTube channel. You get to look at those. If you're like, hey, you know what? I'd like to look at sleep, how to use meditation to help with sleep. You can go peruse the catalog. So I would appreciate that. Appreciate subscribing if you feel comfortable doing that. And if you're really into meditation, you think this is something you want to try to pursue a little bit more seriously, I teach one-on-one classes. It's very casual. I do them over Zoom. We can focus on things that are pertinent to your life, things you want to accomplish with meditation. And I'm a very laid back person. So I think it's a good experience if this is something you want to kind of pursue. So if that is interesting to you, you can email me and we'll find a time that will work for us to meet. I'm going to put my email in the chat right now. It is keith@meditationbreaks.com. Okay, talk about anxiety. I get anxiety every time I have to type this in. I'm always worried I'm going to type it in wrong. Cool. Email me if you're interested in a one-on-one class, or if you have any questions of anything that comes up as you're trying to do some meditation on your own. And let me just catch up here. Thanks, Carol, Charisse. Thank you, Daphne. Everyone, thank you so much for all the kind words. And I hope that this has been a nice, relaxing hour for you. And I look forward to seeing you all next week. All right. Take care.